Good morning. Let's talk about the end of the world. So, two trains of thought. World's going to come to an end, or it's not. We've got 90 seconds on our doomsday clock. That's pretty fun to look at. We've got climate change on everyone's minds. And there's also a lot of data coming out. NOAA released their chart. You have the study on the core of the Earth and how it stopped spinning and reversed itself, or it stopped spinning in 2009 and 2011 and is now showing signs of reversing, potentially a 70-year cycle. Magnetic forces causing cyclical heating, warming, change in the climate. My personal opinion is, yes, it's changing very much. The climate is changing very much. Who causes it? What causes it? That's up for debate. And how much are we affecting it? You can see these things pretty plainly if you look holistically at the planet. Look at mainland China. Look at some of the countries in the South Pacific. Look at South America, anything near the Amazon, slash and burn operations. We're changing, we're terraforming, we are destroying everything. Absolutely, that's easy. How much of an effect does CO2 have? How much does effect does methane have? All the other heavy gases. It's a lot more complex than, hey, carbon's bad. Carbon can be good. That's why you have a greenhouse to grow plants better. Greenhouse gases, greenhouse effect. CO2 helps warm. You have reflectivity. It's greener. That's a positive thing. We do go through cycles. 12,000 years ago, we had a lot more ice than we do now. You can't look at things like the glaciers melting because we haven't had a good period of glacier making. So naturally, glaciers are going to melt. Having said all that, my time in the oil field in the north coast of Alaska, we shipped a lot of our materials up during the summer months when the water was open and there was less ice. In my brief time, 3.5 years or so that I spent up there, every year, and this was a trend before my time as well, was every year we got a longer shipping time. The duration in which the sea ice was open would fluctuate, but it would get longer and longer, and we'd have more of an opportunity to ship by barge to basically the Arctic Circle, the north coast of Alaska. Plain as day, less sea ice. Also had direct information about our Coast Guard and Navy operations out of the Beaufort and Northern Passages, operations in which they are mapping the seafloor for potential shipping routes in the future. If you look at what Russia's doing with their oil and gas industry and their industrialization of their Arctic Circle, Siberia, a lot of the world's gas companies are focused on that right now because they have a similar shelf to what Alaska and Canada, Greenland, Northern Europe. You have these nice big shelves of gas and oil reserves that are very difficult to get to without floating nuclear power plants, without icebreakers. Russia has 38 icebreakers now. We have 2. I think in comparison, we have one that's similar to their 38. There's a lot of attention up there, especially there's a lot of attention as the sea ice continues to recede and the durations get longer and longer. The ability to ship up and over Alaska through Canada, or the ability to ship up and over Russia around to Europe through that side, has massive implications for the future. And we're talking as soon as 2050, that there's a potential for shipping over these northern routes. There's quite a few videos on this now. It wasn't that talked about 10 years ago, but now there's quite a bit of information on it. And you can see the automatic reductions in costs and politics by shipping up and over the Arctic Circle versus through the Panama Canal or around Africa, around South America. China has to go through Panama or go around. And so you have the ability to restrict and tax who goes through the Panama Canal, or they just go around. If they're able to go up and over, either through Canada or Russia. Now, the Northern Passage through Canada is interesting because Canada owns both sides of that Northern Passage. So if they want to pass through, they have to go through Canada's waters. They go up and around, you start getting into Greenland and then North Sea on that side. That changes the entire dynamic of water shipping. Not to mention, as Russia continues to develop and produce oil and gas from these massive reserves in northern Russia, that will also change. This is Russia's big push. They have a lot of power because they have a lot of energy. And the world's equation right now, and has been for a long time, is it's not who has the oil, who has the gas, who has the resources. It's who's selling right now and who's buying it. Alaska and the rest of America is the biggest producer as well as the biggest user of oil and gas. But why use our expensive oil and gas when we can buy Saudi oil and gas for half the price? You know, the difference being $75 to produce versus $25 to produce. Why use ours when we can buy theirs? Yeah, they'll get rich. The biggest transfers of wealth have been energy based. Why use our resources when we can buy their resources? They'll get rich, they will prosper, and then they will run out. There's a really interesting ticker that you can find online where it's the proven reserves of oil and gas left in the world. Proven being the key word here, because unproven is a lot. There's a lot of unproven reserves. That's a big strategy of oil and gas companies, is to they know what's there. You can drill holes, you can bring them online. There's some shady things that take place. The government even owns their own. The government and the military even owns their own drilling rigs. You can poke holes and see what's there. You can do a lot of mapping. There's a lot of ways to not prove a reserve, but prove it enough to know what's there. And there's a lot of unproven oil and gas on the planet. So having said that, take the graph with a grain of salt. The current estimates are around 50 years of oil and gas left on the planet. So let's just take that as fact. 50 years of oil and gas. It's 2023. That puts us to 2073. At 2073, we could potentially be out of gas and oil at the current consumption rates. With an increase of population, we just crossed 8 billion people this year. We're looking at 10 billion by the 2050s. We're increasing at a rate that is quickly going to become unsustainable. It's not that the planet can't sustain it. I've seen estimates as high as like 15 billion people could live on Earth comfortably. That is if we get to 15 billion in time with resources and do it adequately. If you pack 20 people into a trailer, it's not going to work out real well. You got to go slow. You got to expand. You got to build on, add additions. Maybe the kids move out, and then you can comfortably have 20 people living near that trailer. You can't put 20 people into a trailer. You can. So let's take fact as 50 years left of oil and gas. We have proven Arctic sea ice is receding. We have massive slash and burn operations all over the planet. Yes, we are industrializing. Yes, we are terraforming in an interesting way. You could use that term because we are changing the landscape of this planet. Is the world going to end now? Absolutely not. You can hold that perspective. You can go down that road. You can dip your toes into it and think, oh, well, this is not very good. we could all die. Russia, Ukraine, proxy war. That could turn out pretty ugly. We could get into a nuclear winter pretty quickly. That could be bad. We could also be hit by an asteroid. That could be bad. Solar flare, massive earthquakes, super volcanoes. Any number of things could happen that could be planet killers. Is that likely? We could talk probabilities. That's what's interesting about everyone kind of turning on Elon Musk. His sole purpose, which he's expressed on multiple occasions, is, does this action get us closer or further away from getting to Mars? That's his direct line of focus, is, does this get us closer or further away from being multiplanetary? It's very simple. If we have 10,000 years left on this planet, 10,000 years left on Earth, which is, we're about the halfway point then for modern intelligent civilization. Göbekli Tepe, Egyptian pyramids, early signs were, at a maximum 12 to 14,000 years ago from now. Call it 10,000 years, so double that, 10,000 more years. If we have that much time left, it's a long time. But if we know that we're going to get hit by an asteroid in 10,000 years from now, okay, let's put a plan together to make ourselves interplanetary. We got to put something on the moon. We got to put something on Mars. Maybe we can float around Venus. We can go underground on potentially Mercury. It's pretty hot, but probably closer, it'll be Venus. We need to, space stations, things that can float out. We need to understand how people can survive in low gravity. We need to be able to simulate gravity with centrifugal force. We have to come up with all of these things. We have to test it. We have to go out into space. We have to be able to mine things, industrialize, support ourselves, find new resources, understand how we work out there as a population. What does the species look like? Do we become a subspecies in zero gravity? What's our new government methodology? How do we control behaviors? What are optimal behaviors in space? What's optimal communication? What languages will we speak? There's a lot of things to figure out. If that timeline is across 10,000 years, it doesn't look so bad. Start working that back. What if we have 5,000 years? Okay, that gets a little bit taller. What if we only have a couple of 100 years left? What if we have 10 people worth, 10 generations worth? So if typical generation's 25, so 4 people per 100 years, you're 150, or 250 years rather. What if we've got 250 years into the future, 10 people, and all of a sudden we're going to get hit by an asteroid, or climate change is so bad that we can't naturally live like the way that we do now? In 250 years, that's a pretty tall order to be able to indefinitely sustain our population, or a subset of the population, in space off this planet indefinitely. That becomes a very, very difficult equation to solve. How do we get everybody to support that? How do we understand that? First of all, if we knew that this was coming anyways, no one would tell us. We all watched Armageddon. If there was an asteroid coming to hit us all, they would not tell us. They would just try and figure it out, because if they told everybody you're going to die, there'd be mass hysteria, there'd be looting in the streets, civil breakdown, nobody pay attention to anything, mass unrest. You can't just tell the population, hey, it's going to blow up in a week. But what if it's going to blow up in 250 years? What if it's going to blow up in 1,000 years? You gotta plan for those things, and that is precisely what Elon Musk is doing, and it's the only thing that matters. Tesla's fundraising, Boring Company is to learn how to dig underground, because that's the best way to survive on Mars, is to dig underground. You've got all of the Tesla battery. We need batteries. That's the most important part, because without power, you can generate power, but if you can't store power, it's useless. So there's research. You've got SpaceX. They just stacked the Starship. That's going to be absolutely wild. If you want to watch a good video, it's the first 10,000 days on Mars, I believe is the title. It explains how, every 2 years or so, we're going to want to send a bunch of ships to Mars. And then for 2 years, we'll build them. And then when we get into our window where we can launch, about 6 months long. Then we'll be able to launch all of our starships to Mars, ferry a bunch of people over. That's really interesting. You look at things like Neuralink, how to, me speaking, our upload download speed is very slow. Speaking words, understanding is painfully slow if you measure it in upload download speeds. Being able to connect ourselves to a high-speed interface to each other, we can communicate, we can upload, download much, much, much faster. Orders of magnitude faster. All things that would be very important when we're traveling in space and we need to process data at a very high rate of speed. Beyond the capabilities of, we're going to be more and more dependent on machine learning and artificial intelligence, general intelligence. All of these things are going to help us more and more and more. I mean, they're landing rockets easily now, automatically, but that's going to become more of a thing. But that's Neuralink. So everything that company is doing, everything that those people are doing, is to get us closer to Mars. Okay, so end of the world. Is it going to end? Could. What should we do about it? Should we help that? In our lifetime, in our little circles, in our little bubbles, the most important part is ourselves and our families and our friends, the little circles that we can affect. You don't want to try and save the world. You want to try and, make your own bed and solve the problems that you can solve that are in your circle. But what if we do want to save the world? Cool, go for it. There's a spectrum of how bad things can get. Look at any of the futuristic, post-apocalyptic movies that have come out. That Fifth Element's a great example. You've got these massive sky-high tower buildings, and then down at the bottom it's all just the smog. You can't even see down there, and everything's so populated. The Total Recalls, the Terminators, you name it, everything. You'll still have people. It just won't be good. Climate change. Okay, so let's say we break 2 degrees Celsius. Let's say we go 5 degrees Celsius by 2100. Yeah, things are going to change drastically. 1,000% things are going to change drastically. Are we all going to die? Absolutely not. Are a bunch of things going to die? Yes. A bunch of things are going to die. A bunch of things are going to change. Plants will change. The birds will change. We'll have mass extinction events. We'll have new things that are adaptable to the different climates. Places that are already hot will get much hotter. Places that are cold will get warmer and become more temperate. We'll open up a bunch of new things that have never been experienced before. The Arctic will become warmer. We can plant more food in different areas. These dust storms, say the southwest of the United States and North America, it's already pretty desolate and deserted if you look at a satellite photo. But what if that becomes more of like a Sahara Desert? The Sahara Desert 10,000 years ago was lush and green, and the Nile River was a very beautiful place to live. Mesopotamia, all of these places now that are just deserts in sand, used to be very green. They change over time. We have these fluctuations as the planet spins and turns, and the heat changes. It could change a lot, but it's not like we're all going to die. It's not the end of the world. You could still live there. It might not be good looking. I mean, look at the images of mainland China with just endless and endless condos, just endless expanse to the horizon of mid-rise apartment complexes and factories. As far as the eye can see, as far as you drive, it's just endless. Yeah, we're not all going to die though. Might have to go inside, might be so polluted that you can't breathe outside. So there's an interesting point here I like to make is how long before the world ends, okay? But how long before humans can no longer survive in this natural state? Right now, the atmosphere is adequate for us to breathe naturally. You can go outside and you can breathe this. We're adapted to it, we evolved with it. How much pollution in the air before we can't breathe it without, say, wearing masks or respirators? Is it going to get too hot that we can't? So there's kind of this term natural human species, natural Homo sapien. The way in which we evolved in this time scale, we're able to breathe the atmosphere, we're able to survive here. It's not too hot, there's just enough radiation. You might get tan. If you're outside too long, you might get burnt. There's enough food for us to eat. The plants that we eat don't immediately kill us. Things are carbon-based, we're carbon-based, everything kind of jives right now. As things change, there may become a point in time where we can no longer live as natural humans. And I think that's more of an important point that we need to look at, is at what point can humans not survive in the way in which we have before? And it could be any number of things. It could even be biological. There's so many, we're packed so densely, so tight packed in these cities and these urban centers because we're so overpopulated that there's so much bacteria and pathogens that you have to wear suits all the time. That was an interesting thought when the pandemic first started, because of course it was wear gloves and bleach everything and wear masks, and even just being in close proximity to each other. If you go to places like Los Angeles and San Francisco, those are great examples. You're outside, it's warm temperatures, it's not like it's cold. New York is a little bit different because in the wintertime it gets so cold everything kind of dies. You don't have a lot of bacteria floating around. I mean, you do, but it will die outside in the colder temperatures. Similar effect in the summertime in California. It gets so hot with the UV and just temperature alone. Now some bacteria thrive in the heat and some don't. Some are still okay in the cold. But the point is, how much of this close packed, tight-knit civilization is affected by things like bloodborne pathogens, airborne pathogens. That was an interesting part of the origins of COVID-19, is they said it either came from a wet market or it came from a laboratory in which they were adjusting these virus strains. Okay, if you take the wet lab theory, that means there's so many people packed tightly into that area that you have these wet markets, and I implore you to go look at them. They look at the videos. There's so many people that naturally new viruses are going to come out. This is conservation 101. When you pack too many things tightly into one area, some Mother Nature is going to throw a virus in the middle of it. Look at CWD with deer. You cannot domesticate wild deer, and because we have so many deer in high fence and low fence areas, so there's more white-tailed deer now than have ever been in North America. They're so tightly packed in there. Mother Nature just threw out this prion disease and is potentially going to just wipe out most of the deer. We're working on it right now. Seems to be doing okay, but mad cow, any number of diseases, when you have too many animals in one area, you generate naturally these diseases that will back this population off. These are natural cycles. When there's too many of one thing, it's something's going to happen and it's going to back that population off. Back in Alaska, we used to have these used to be very predictable, I'm not so sure anymore, but used to be very predictable rabbit cycles. About every 8 years, you'd have this rabbit explosion. You see these snowshoe hares absolutely you'd walk out into the woods and they would just be running everywhere. We'd have all these rabbits, which in turn was very good for the next level up on the food chain. So the coyotes, the wolves, the lynx, everything else would start eating more and more rabbits. They would become plentiful. Well, there'd be so many rabbits that they would eat themselves out of their environment. They'd eat all the willow leaves and all just the winter foliage. Then the rabbits suddenly they would die off. And then once they would die off, then all of these new lynx and coyotes and wolves, they didn't have the food to eat anymore, so their population would dwindle, and then there would be less predation on the rabbits. Then you would regrow these plants after a couple of years, and then the rabbits' numbers would come back up, and then everything would chase it. And it was this nice, predictable cycle of everything kind of going up and down. That's a very simple version of this, but that goes for a lot of other things. When you pack too many things tightly into one area, something's going to happen and they're all just going to die off. You just can't do it for any number of mechanisms, and that goes for us too. If you pack too many humans in one little spot, we're gonna have new novel viruses that come of it. We're gonna have new diseases that affect us in different ways. We're gonna have different things that take place where it's just not going to be sustainable. You got to spread out a little bit. You can't just be stacked on top of each other. So to tie all this back together, is the world going to end? Yes or no? If it's a no, then don't worry about it. People need to calm down a little bit. If it's a yes, if you think the world's going to end, and if you can come up with a reason, then start planning for it. Do something. Don't just whine. I think my biggest problem with a lot of the discussions and narratives that are taking place right now is that people are just whining. This is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Sometimes it's good to be vocal about things, bring attention to it, cool, I understand that aspect, but don't just whine about it. If you think the world's gonna end, do something about it. Write something down, try and express yourself, try and make a difference, try and make a change, look at actual change. Do we need to recycle more, use less power, whatever, whatever the mechanism that you think the world's gonna end by, do something that's gonna fix it. If you really think it's that bad, what's going to be really important, and I'm pulling this from Zombieland, is cardio. Cardio. Start working on your lungs, work on your health, because if the world's really going to be that bad, then we're going to become nomadic, we're going to travel around like Mad Max. You don't see a lot of unhealthy people sitting on their couch in the post-apocalyptic future worlds. You got to kind of be able to move around and run from the cannibals. You got to be able to kind of survive a little bit better. So if you really think it's going to be that bad, work on your cardio. If you don't think it's going to be that bad, don't just abuse it either. We don't need to just be throwing stuff out the window, don't need to be polluting, don't need to be littering. If you don't think it's that bad, cool. That's a good way to live your life. Go forth, be fruitful, enjoy yourself. But if you think the world's going to end, don't just whine about it. We need to actually take meaningful steps and figure out what we're supposed to do next. What happens next? Where are we going with all this? Why are these things happening? Have a discussion, talk to each other about it. Rant over. Thank you for listening.